Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, joins us now here in the studio. It might have taken a TV drama, but it does feel like things are starting to move.
Yes, things have moved swiftly this week since the ITV drama last week. Last night in the Commons, the Postal Affairs Minister, that's Kevin Hollingrake, did a statement and then took questions for about more than 2 hours. And it was a rare cross-party consensus. I mean, for example, MPs have just been debating Rwanda and no consensus there. But on this issue, real consensus from MPs of all parties. Now, what has happened today, I mean, the headline today, of course, is that Paula Venables has given up her CBE, bowed to pressure, really. I think she probably looked at this morning's newspapers and saw that even the Prime Minister was saying she had to give that up. So she's bowed to the pressure. So that's one issue dealt with, a petition of 1.2 million people. But Mr Chalk, it was justice questions in the House of Commons. He has had meetings, before that session with top judges to look at the legal moves. Now, during the exchanges, both last night in the Commons and in the Commons today, and we saw Sir Robert Buckland there, who's a former Justice Secretary, there's pressure for legislation to sort this out, a number of moves. Strip the Post Office of its powers to, as MPs said last night, police itself. Stop the Post Office taking out these prosecutions, which have been shown to be so flawed. The other thing, of course, that MPs want is the appeals process speeded up and also the compensation speeded up. Now, what's also come out of the list in the last 24 hours, of course, is a lot of MPs are saying, oi, what about Fujitsu's role, the computer company? And Mr Hollingrake was saying they've got to probably come up with some of the compensation here, not just taxpayers. But as for Alex Chalk, the legal moves, I think we might get a statement from him in the House tomorrow following his talks with the lawyers about how they're proposing to pardon, if you like, all these people, get these convictions overturned and get justice. We've heard some harrowing stories from these victims in recent days.
Yeah, we certainly have. John, thank you very much indeed. As John was saying, it's taken an awful long time for the victims to get justice, but it feels like things are moving. Right, let's bring in our duo for tonight, each with vast experience of government, I should say. Former ministers Caroline Flint and Alistair Burt, thank you for being on the programme.
Pleasure, thank you.
I did an interview last night with one of the victims of this case, and I have to say, it is just unbelievable, actually, when you hear their stories. These are hard-working people, never committed a crime in their life, and suddenly to be kind of flung into this nightmare. Caroline, why do you think it has taken so long for the justice to be done?
I think partly because every case was dealt with as an individual case. So seeing the volume that we've obviously been revealed in recent times, not just with the TV programme, but even before that led to the inquiry, just showed that this wasn't just one-offs. This was a systemic problem with an IT system that wasn't worked. And what's worrying about this is almost no questioning of that IT system in itself when it clearly was making huge mistakes. But I think it's also about, the fact that somewhere along the way, information that was being provided to ministers' judgments about what they did with that information, just basically almost doubled down on the individuals concerned. And from what I understand, the Post Office and their lawyers actually really went to town on these individuals. I mean, the huge amount of pressure on them and the accusations being made. As I said, there was a lot of doubling down on these individuals in the decades that have happened since this first started to become a problem, which is pretty horrendous and awful. And whilst we've obviously seen the CBE, I think it handed back today, there's a lot of others who need to answer questions, not just Fujitsu, but also some of the other managers within the Post Office and elsewhere as well. And
how about government ministers as well?
I think a series of government ministers, I mean, it's known that I think there were 11 that covered the process over time. They will be looking very hard at what they were told. But I think for a minister like Ed Davey to say he was lied to consistently on an industrial scale, well, you can't just leave that sitting on the table. If he was, then, as Caroline has indicated, then there's more actions possible against those who were covering up. But one of the reasons this has taken so long is there is a tendency to cover up. I represented those caught up in the contaminated blood scandal, where over some 40 years, nearly 3,000 people have died because of the biggest scandal in NHS history, where people were given contaminated blood as haemophiliacs, and compensation has still not been fully paid, even though the inquiry, which is about to conclude, has recommended just pay the compensation that's necessary. And I hope the government's determination to pay full compensation quickly in the Post Office case will now come into the contaminated blood. But it has taken years to get information out because people protect themselves and other people don't believe something bad can happen from big organisations. We have that tendency.
It's a really good point, actually, about covering up, about doubling down, and also about trusting IT as well.
Well, totally. I mean, you know, IT is, it's in all our lives, and how many people, whether it's the benefit system or, you know, whatever it may be, you know, we're relying on the data to be used in an appropriate way. And two, I know as an MP, in some of my casework, someone would come to me and say, I'm sure they've got something wrong here. And, you know, to be honest, there was a wrong entry or they just believe what the computer said, rather than maybe going back to some basics and actually really look at the person
It's common sense
in front
as well.
of them.
Like, I mean, the woman I spoke to last night, Janet, like, postmistress for, I think, 12 years, based in Hull, she was accused of stealing £59,000. I mean, what do they think she spent it on, you know?
And how suddenly
It's ridiculous.
the Post Office network was suddenly full of people who were cheating them seems inconceivable now when you look at the stories and nobody had joined the dots.
And the Post Office would have had the full picture because they would have had the individual cases, but they would have had the full picture of everyone. The fact that they, you know, didn't even sort of, you know, check themselves and say, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know what the numbers were for fraud or what have you by Post Office, you know, masters and mistresses before this technology came in. But anyone with a brain cell would have said, hang on, how can we spike up like this?
Right.
How do we spike up like this and not maybe question what we're saying about these individuals and collectively about?
So there's a lot more of this to go.
Yeah, there certainly is. Thanks both very much indeed. And of course, the Post Office scandal, sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the chief leader writer at The Observer, that's Sonia Soda, and the deputy editor of Conservative Home, who is Henry Hill. Now, last year, there were 2.1 million victims of domestic abuse. 2.1 million. And there are many, many injustices that are attached to domestic abuse, of course. The controlling behaviour, the feeling that you're walking on eggshells, violence sometimes. Deciding to walk away from that situation, that relationship, is not easy. What if you're being financially controlled as well? You know, trying to get cash back at Sainsbury's so you don't leave a paper trail, hiding a passport, snatching a moment to stuff as many baby clothes as you can into a rucksack. Because remember this, it's not the abuser he has to leave home. He gets to sleep in his own bed. It's the victim. And often the children as well. Their world are already crumbling around them, and just at that moment when all they want as kids is stability, they have to leave their home, leave their school, leave their friends, often without getting to say goodbye. And then where will they live? A hotel, a hostel, a sofa? So when people, you know, roll their eyes about victims returning to their abusers, well, put yourselves in their shoes. There's a lot to think about here. In a moment, I'm going to speak to an extraordinary woman with an extraordinary story about the terrible cost of domestic abuse. But first, though, our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, has been looking at a new government plan to give domestic abuse survivors cash payments of £2,500 each to help them flee, help them leave. This is her report.
In the London suburbs, an ordinary house. But for the women who live here, it's a lifeline. They've fled domestic abuse, often with no money for clothes, nappies or food, let alone to find accommodation.
I came here because I was scared. My husband was beating me, he was hurting me, and I couldn't find any help.
This victim, who spoke no English, ended up sleeping rough before coming to this women's refuge.
It was really scary. It was a new country, I didn't know anything, and I had to leave my daughter behind.
And we're trying to push for that necessary change in that.
Staff here are being told about a new Home Office scheme, which will give hundreds of women in these dire situations access to cash payments of up to £2,500.
There's going to be a lot of demand for these payments and not many of them to go round. How will you decide who gets them? There's never been anything like this scheme before. No government has done it. No government has provided direct cash grants to support people to leave domestic abuse. Of course, we're going to have to see how it works through. It may be that we need to increase funding. The point of this initial cash injection is to give you the security and the confidence to make that first move to leave the relationship and hopefully come to a refuge. And after that, there's a more substantial amount of money that's available to help you get back on your feet, so to pay for your first few months of rental in a new accommodation, to help you look for a job.
For some, it could make all the difference.
It's a very good idea. When you can buy things, you feel more confidence. I would do a course. It's a start.
The scheme will be rolled out across England and Wales through women's aid charities. A pilot last year for 600 people prevented some women going back to abusive relationships. For those in the worst of circumstances, the chance of a way out. Tamara Cohen, Sky News.
Tamara Cohen, there. Well, we can speak now to Rachel Williams, someone who's got very direct experience of domestic abuse. She now campaigns for action on the issue. Rachel, I've read about what happened to you. And first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for somehow finding the strength to talk about it. You know, we're all very appreciative of that. Thank you. How did you initially meet your abusive partner?
So I met my perpetrator through his sister who lived opposite me. And I always say, you know, when people say, you know, why do you go out with men like this? You know, you don't go out with somebody that slaps you on a first date. You know, they're genuinely charming. I always say they're like a chameleon and they'll morph into whatever you want. So you're going out with this guy, for me, under a false pretense that he was a decent guy. And that's how I first met him.
And what was he like at the beginning then?
Very charming, extremely funny, used to make me laugh, which was quite nice, because I do like having a laugh. And yeah, just a genuinely nice guy, came with a bit of baggage. You know, he told me about his family life as a child, which wasn't the best. And yeah, he was just a decent guy, so I thought.
And was there any early moments when you start thinking, that's a bit of a red flag, or that's made me feel a bit uncomfortable?
I think for me, had I have known more about healthy relationships, because I was 21 at the time, I was a single mum, didn't really know the red flags. I mean, looking now through professional lenses, they were so blatantly there. Had I have known, you know, the control, saying, you know, things like, oh, you know, wouldn't a skirt, you know, a bit longer be better? You know, why are you wearing fake suntan? You know, why are you putting them false eyelashes on? Things like that was the first sort of signs. But yeah, if I'd only have known.
Yeah, but as you say, you're 21, you're a kid, he's a charming guy, you're having a fun time. You just wouldn't think anything of it at all. When did things start to change for you?
So the first significant moment of abuse that I vividly remember was when I was 7 months pregnant with his child, and we had an argument and he came bounding up the stairs. Bearing in mind, he was 6'7" and 22 stone. He was a bodybuilder with a 60-inch chest, and he ran into the bedroom and lifted me off the floor by my throat. And he told me later he let me go when my lips turned blue. And that was a significant moment for me of the abuse. But he fell on his knees, cried like a baby, you know, begging for forgiveness. He don't know what come over him, you know, and talking about stuff in his past. And I just thought I could fix him.
And you're pregnant as well, right? And you have another child as well to think about. How old was your other child at that point?
So when I met Darren, my oldest Josh, he was 2 at the time. So he was only a couple of years old, a toddler.
And did the violence continue?
Yeah, I can remember another point when Jack was born, so that was my child with Darren, and another vivid moment. I can remember there was another argument in the house, and Darren grabbed me by my hair and somehow swung me round on the kitchen floor, which was carpet at the time, and I had a pair of loafers on, and it left like almost like black marks in the carpet. And I can remember being on the floor and seeing Jack watching what was going on, and it just, you know, once you're in it, you're sort of in it and just constantly sort of trying to manage it as best you can.
Did you think about leaving?
Many times. Darren's words to me, though, was there's only one way out for you, and that's in a wooden box. Little did I know and found out later he was a serial perpetrator, which I wasn't aware of. And thankfully, after the events that unfolded in the end, Clare's Law was introduced then, which is great because, you know, victims can do a search on their exes. But, you know, there's so much that can be done to help and protect victims of abuse.
You mentioned Clare's Law there. It is actually really important for everyone watching the programme to know that that isn't a really important law passed. That means you can check up on people who've entered your life and your children's life in this way as well. He shot you, didn't he? What happened on that day?
So I finally decided to leave on the 9th of July after him strangling me and slitting his wrist in front of Jack. And I can remember thinking at that point, if he's capable of doing that in front of our son, what else is he capable of doing? And that was when the light switch went off. And the fear of staying with Darren then became greater than the fear of leaving him. So I left him. For 6 weeks, he stalked me. Bombarded me with calls, text. They arrested him for the non-fatal strangulation, which thank God I helped. I was instrumental in getting that on the statute book. But, you know, he was charged with common assault, which he may as well have just been slapped on the wrist. So he was on bail. And then on the 19th of August 2011, it was around 2:20 in the afternoon, and I was working in my hairdresser's where I worked. And I can remember the shop going quite dark, and I can remember looking at the door to see what was blocking the sunlight, and I could see Darren pushing the door open and reaching in a bag and pulling out this sawn-off shotgun. And I don't know why. They say you fight, flight, fear, flock, friend. And I decided to run towards him and started battling with him for the gun. At that point, then I can remember being hit on the head with the gun and falling on the floor. And then just going into a fetal position and saying, you know, think of Jack, think of Jack. And at that point, he pulled the trigger. The left leg took the first blast, and the second shot skimmed past my ear. Next thing then, he pounded me with kicks and stamps and stamped all over my head, all over my body. Next thing he was gone, and later found hung in the evening.
I honestly don't know how you managed to tell this story with so much dignity. Can I say it almost feels like it's something that sort of make up. It's just so horrific, and I'm really sorry that this happened to you. You know, the thing that kind of slightly breaks my heart reading about your story is the story of Jack as well. I don't know if that's something that you feel comfortable in sharing.
Yeah, the tragedy in my story, Sophie, is my son Jack, because I was in hospital for almost 6 weeks recovering, and I came out of hospital on the Friday, and Jack took his life on the Monday. You know, a 16-year-old boy who was, you know, brought up in a toxic environment. And, you know, he is the tragedy in my case, and hence why my mess is my message. And I will do all I can to help others who find themselves in positions like I was in. You know, when I do, you know, campaign, and I do speak out quite openly and honestly about it, because at the end of the day, domestic abuse is everybody's business.
It's, you know, just at the time when you would hope that you had found some safety for you and your family, something like that happens, and it's just appalling. And I think the message as well about how it's not, you know, the children are victims in this as well, is so important. Do you welcome the news that there's going to be more money for survivors of domestic abuse and their children to try and find a safe new life?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, you know, it is always the victim that tends to be leaving, that tends to be fleeing, that tends to be running, you know, instead of, you know, managing that perpetrator and holding them to account. And that could be on another programme. You know, I've got so much to talk about, but focusing on what the government has done. It's amazing that they've done this. It's going to help so many victims, because we know if a victim cannot scrape £100 together, the likelihood of them leaving is very minimal. So it will go a long way to help those who find themselves in that financial position where they can't, you know, scrape together some money to put down on rent or, you know, some accommodation. So it is great.
I'd love to speak to you again. You're clearly a woman who, you know, is on a bit of a mission. We need people like you in this world. So we'd love to speak to you again on the programme, if that's all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, look, I'm not an expert on this, but it does really feel, doesn't it, that, you know, when it is the perpetrators who get to stay in their houses and it's the kids who have to leave their homes, leave their schools, leave everything that they know, the victims as well, it doesn't really feel like something is right there, does it? You're watching The Politics Hub with me, Sophie Ridge. Coming up. Battle is set to resume on the government's Rwanda bill next week, but did the government survive a Labour challenge on their plan tonight? Find out next.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
I don't know about you, but I'm still slightly reeling after that interview. So we thought it may be a good time to remind you that the Samaritans helpline is available. That is 116 123 116 123. You can also email Jo, that's Jo, @samaritans.org. Right, moving on to some of today's other news, because tonight MPs have been debating a Labour motion which would call for the release of documents relating to the government's Rwanda policy. So that includes not just its cost, but also reports that Rishi Sunak had his doubts about the plan. Well, earlier the government confirmed that the Rwanda bill will return to the Commons next week. Our chief political correspondent John Craig has hot-footed it to Central Lobby in the House of Commons for us. John, what's been happening?
Before I talk about Rwanda, let me just bring you a little bit of breaking news. I've just been tipped off that we may get an announcement of government action on the post office scandal from the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's Questions tomorrow, I beg your pardon. So I'm told probably not a statement from Alex Chalk tomorrow, but quite likely, I'm told by a senior MP who's heavily involved, that there may well be an announcement from the Prime Minister at PMQs tomorrow on the post office scandal. Back to Rwanda. A few minutes ago, they voted on a Labour motion which was demanding to see all sorts of documents and facts and figures about the cost of the Rwanda scheme, which the opposition claims the government is hiding from MPs and the public. Amongst the documents that Labour wanted handed over was some that we reported on at the weekend, leaked number 10 documents suggesting Rishi Sunak had doubts about the scheme when he was Chancellor. It's also been reported this week that when he was standing for the Tory leadership, he considered opposing the Rwanda scheme. Well, that's all been denied by the PM and his allies. And what we heard tonight was from claims by Yvette Cooper opening the debate that the PM was weak, a famous phrase used by Tony Blair about John Major years ago. What have you got to hide was the claim from Labour. Well, for the government, Tom Pursglove, the illegal migration minister, came back at a very punchy speech accusing Labour of having no plan. Well, predictably, the government won the vote quite comfortably. Voting was 228 for the Labour motion. It's what they call an opposition day here, and it was 304 against. That's a government majority of 96. Now, the earlier debate, actually, the government had an even bigger majority, around about 100, on another opposition day debate motion on dentistry. The Labour vote in this vote that's just happened, 228, was about 30 higher than it was in the earlier debate. That's because the SNP voted with Labour. So it shows that next week, when MPs debate that the committee stage, which Penny Mordaunt, the Leader of the Commons, has announced today will take place Tuesday and Wednesday. The SNP, who voted with the Labour Party tonight, the Liberals, they also did, I'm told, they will be voting with all the opposition parties will be voting against the government. I just saw Stephen Flynn. I said, did you vote with Labour on Rwanda? He said, of course we did. Now, the other developments on Rwanda today, of course, are that the Tory right-wing opponents of the bill, who want to make it much tougher, have been working out their plans, working out what amendments they're going to table later on this week. We're expecting to hear more from the likes of Danny Kruger, perhaps this evening, perhaps tomorrow. You remember on Sky News at the weekend, Robert Jenrick said he was going to table amendments later this week as well. Now, when she made her slightly surprise announcement at a point of order earlier today about lunchtime, Penny Mordaunt was challenged by Labour's Lucy Powell. Why are you announcing this now, not waiting till Thursday? Well, the answer was to give people more time to put down their amendments. What that really meant was, of course, to give the government more time to study the amendments put down by those Tory right-wingers so they can work out their strategy for next Tuesday. So, government's comfortably won a vote tonight, but the real showdown comes next Tuesday and Wednesday, when there will be amendments from Tory backbenchers trying to toughen up that Rwanda bill. That is Tuesday and Wednesday, the committee stage. The government will be frantically trying to do deals with its rebels on the right wing of the Tory party.
OK, John, thank you very much. John Craig there in Central Lobby for us this evening. Well, let's talk to Caroline and Alistair again, shall we? Can't have a win for the government, but there's going to be a big showdown next week. Alistair, if you were still a Conservative MP, what would you be voting?
I knew you were going to ask this question, so I thought through my answer very carefully. It's very difficult to say because I'm not a Conservative MP, so I don't have the pressures that they have. Also, I would be partly driven by the fact that I don't want anything that strengthens the right wing of the Conservative Party. And I would probably be voting with One Nation colleagues to make sure that my right-wing colleagues didn't get a win out of this. The idea is not as outlandish as it once appeared. We all know now that the Labour government were also given the possibility of the ideas of assessing people abroad. We saw that revealed in government documents recently, and other countries are thinking about it. Nonetheless, I don't think it's the answer. I think much better is to make the sort of agreements that we've made with Albania, which has really resulted in a reduction. I'd far rather we were pursuing that course of action. I'm not sure that Rwanda is going to be the answer. And I think we've spent a lot of time talking about this, but really there are other aspects of migration to consider. And I'm not sure how I would vote, bearing in mind all those different things, but I do know I don't think it's really the answer.
Caroline, you're always quite thoughtful on immigration. Labour's position is, even if it's shown to work, we're going to get rid of it. Is that the right position?
I think the problem is it's sort of sucked the energy out of discussing any other alternatives or strengthening some of the tools that we already have, where there needs to be more resource and there needs to be more people. For example, the number of people who work in assessing cases and the quality of those people that you employ, and along with that, what you pay them as well is important to get the right people in those jobs as well. So it's just, it just sucks the energy away from discussing any of those other issues. And you end up with the government, as we have really, despite whatever they else might say about immigration, they are completely looked through the lens of the Rwanda policy. And as Yvette Cooper is keen to say over and over and again, so far more Home Secretaries have gone to Rwanda than actually asylum seekers. So again, it is a policy that a lot has been invested in. I do not see, like Alistair, that this is necessarily the answer, even if it does show that actually, if you meet certain requirements, it can be a legal possibility to pursue alternative third countries to assess people. But it clearly isn't the answer. We have some massive issues, and what I would be saying, probably as a Labour politician, is what are we going to do about some of the other areas we need to attend to? There clearly was, under the Labour government, massive efforts through our role in the European Union to deal with people not using aeroplanes. So we had advanced flight information of passengers. I think actually a result of actually clamping down on the lorries has resulted in the boats as an alternative. And importantly is really assessing people as quickly as possible. And then it is international agreements with countries to get them to accept their people back when they actually have failed, whether that's in Albania, whether that's in other countries in Africa or in the West Indies as well.
Physically to stop them coming
Yeah,
in the first
absolutely.
place, which is relationships with France and Belgium.
Yeah, and let's not forget, there are also people who come in legally into our country and then overstay. And that, again, you see, we don't talk about those issues because this issue is dominating the whole debate. So,
it does feel like we're spending a lot of time talking about Rwanda.
Yeah, just Rwanda.
So let's stop.
Yeah, okay,
Thank you both very much indeed for your thoughtful contributions on the debate. You're watching The Politics Hub with me, Sophy Ridge. Still to come, we'll be getting Labour's view on Rwanda and the Post Office. Don't go anywhere. welcome back. Well, as John Craig was just telling us, MPs have been in the House of Commons debating the government's Rwanda plan. I'm pleased to say that joining us now from Labour is the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, that's Darren Jones. Good to have you on the programme. Before we start talking about immigration, about Rwanda, I want to talk to you about the Post Office. It's dominated the news agenda. We've seen, of course, Paula Venables, the former Chief Executive of the Post Office, hand back her CBE. Is that something you welcome?
Yes, but Paula Venables still has more questions to answer, and she'll have to do that in front of the statutory inquiry in due course. This is an issue that I've worked on for many, many years now, previously as chair of the Business Committee in the House of Commons. And look, I'm pleased that the ITV drama has accelerated the actions from ministers. Some of us have been calling for that for many, many months and years now, not least the victims who were involved. That's good, but there's still clearly much more to be done to bring compensation and justice to those affected.
As you say, we've been aware of this issue for years. You've obviously been very across it, working on it closely as well. Why do you think it has taken effectively a TV show to make all this happen?
Do you know, that's a great question. I mean, it was probably this time last year that I stood up in the House of Commons on behalf of my cross-party committee in Parliament and said that ministers needed to move more quickly. And they told us that they were moving as quick as they could. Turns out they could actually move quicker because they're now doing that. The drama's taken the public imagination. I mean, having watched it, I mean, it's a hugely emotive show. Even though I know the issues quite well and I know many of the people in the show, the kind of emotion you feel from actually watching it on the screen was clearly evident, and that's moved people, and that's good, but we need to maintain that momentum going forward.
Yeah, well, hear to that. You obviously just put it over here from the House of Commons. You've been talking about Rwanda. The government won easily today, but this kind of showdown, if you like, really starts next week. Are there any circumstances where Labour could support this scheme?
Well, we've said it's not effective because clearly, based on the facts, it's not effective. I mean, the government...
Well, it hasn't started yet. What if it does start and then it is effective?
Well, they've spent hundreds of millions of pounds for what so far? Are they really going to get anybody to Rwanda? Time will tell. We've seen that Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, apparently questioned the validity of this scheme himself. We've said, and Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, said that we would use this money instead to fund a police unit to crack down on the criminal gangs that are causing this problem in the first place. That's really where you tackle the root causes of these issues, and we think the government should take that course of action.
Caroline made the point earlier that we spent an awful long time talking about Rwanda when nothing's actually happened. So I just want to talk to you a bit more widely about immigration. Is immigration too high?
So we've got a number of problems. There's different types of issues that are in play at the moment. At the kind of headline level, the fact is that the Conservatives have lost control of our borders and they've got a broken asylum system. That's why you're seeing all of these red lights on the dashboard for whether it's net migration and visa allocation, or whether it's asylum seekers, or whether it's channel crossings. All of it's not working and they need to get a grip of it. But the fact is that Conservative ministers are just arguing amongst themselves about these different policies between different factions and not getting the job done. I mean, take the legislation that's been put forward by the government. The last two bills they put forward to deal with channel crossings, the last one has had to be not implemented because they thought it'd make the situation worse. The one before that, which was Priti Patel all that time ago, has been part suspended because it wasn't working.
It's quite a cautious answer, I might say, to the question of is immigration too high? And I get it, because obviously you got into a bit of hot water, shall we say, for comments you made previously, saying that Labour would hope to cut immigration in its first term. You said the normal level is a couple of 100,000 a year, but it depends on the needs of the economy. I think it's pretty fair to say that Labour quickly distancing itself from the idea that there could be a target of 200,000. What happened? Did you get a call from the leader's office saying, what, don't say that?
No, well, look, if you look at that interview with Laura Kuenssberg, I was very clear that I said there would be no caps or targets set under a Labour government because they don't.
But you did say that Labour could bring it down to normal levels, which you defined as a couple of 100,000.
I merely pointed to the facts, which is the evidence that is, as definition, normal over the previous years, and that the numbers are too high. What we talked about in the interview in a little bit more depth was why is it that they're this high? Why is that abnormal compared to normal times?
Did you get a call from the leader's office?
Not the leader's office, no. The headline was.
Someone did give you
I got a couple of calls, but the headline wasn't. The headline was not reflective of our policy. And to be fair, in the interview, that's not quite what I'd said.
I want to talk to you about education. Bridget Phillipson today gave a speech about absences in schools. So what's the idea?
Well, we know that there's been a huge number of absences from schools, and anyone that has children at school knows that every single day matters. And this is off the back of children missing a lot of time at school through COVID. This has serious implications for them, but also more broadly for the economy when the time comes for those young people to enter the workforce. So more needs to be done to make sure that pupils are in school being educated, and where we can put more support in place to help schools and parents to make that the case, we will do so.
She was pretty scathing about Rishi Sunak as well. I just want to show you what she said about Rishi Sunak in this speech. She said this, a long-term recovery plan for our children sliced to ribbons by our now Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, because the private schools he knows, the schools he chooses, were always going to get by. So does Labour really think that people who send their children to private school don't care about education for others?
Oh, no, I don't think that's what Bridget was saying.
It sounds a bit like that's what she's saying.
No, I don't think so. What Bridget's referring to there is that private schools often have more means, more money in the bank, more abilities to put in additional support and catch-up lessons and various things.
What she's saying there, it seems to me, is that the recovery plan for our children was sliced by Rishi Sunak because the private schools were always going to get by.
Because
the schools he knows, the private schools he knows.
The reference is to Rishi Sunak, I think, not to the private schools, because if you look, for example, at the COVID catch-up scheme, it's not been effective in helping pupils catch up for the lessons they missed during the pandemic.
The implication is pretty clear here, though, isn't it? That Rishi Sunak, because he didn't go to state school, because he doesn't send his children to state school, doesn't care about state schools.
Oh, yeah, no, I think Bridget is absolutely saying that Rishi Sunak doesn't care about state schools. What she's not saying is what you said to me just now, which is that private schools don't care about pupils in state schools. That's slightly different.
I said parents who send their children to private schools.
And I'm sure parents that send their kids to private schools care equally about parents that send their kids to
Rishi
state
Sunak.
schools. Well, if Rishi Sunak cared about these things, he'd be putting more effort into trying to solve some of the problems.
She's pretty scathing about the Conservative track record on education more widely. How's it going in Wales, where Labour's in charge?
Well, Wales obviously get money from Westminster as part of the settlement, and there have been long-held challenges in the education system around kind of investment, and there's been obviously strikes and various things happening across the country. The fact is, we know that there's a problem here that was exacerbated by COVID that has not got better, and we know that it's not just for the benefit of pupils and parents, but for broadly the economy in the long run that we have to get this right. That's why Bridget made this speech today, which was welcomed by many people in the sector, just setting out why this mission is really important for us in the Labour Party. And if we are to win the election, the next general election, that voters and parents will know that this will be a top-tier priority for us.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Good to have you on the programme today. Great. Thank you very much indeed. That was Darren Jones, the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury. We are going to go to the House of Commons now, where the Select Committee on Foreign Affairs was grilling David Cameron, Lord Cameron, I should say, to give him his full title, the new Foreign Secretary. Let's have a listen.
If you're asking, am I worried that Israel has taken action that might be in breach of international law because this particular premises has been bombed or whatever? Yes, of course I'm worried about that.
But the question that I want to ask is the point, have you received legal advice which says that Israel is in breach of international humanitarian law?
The short answer to that is no. But I want to qualify it instantly, because it's not fair on the lawyers, because of course the lawyers give you lots of advice, saying, look, we're worried about this event, that event, this event, that event.
Lord Cameron speaking there to MPs a little earlier. Well, let's bring in Caroline and Alistair. Shall we? Alistair, you've got a lot of experience on the Middle East from your kind of ministerial roles. Do you think David Cameron is right there when he talks about how he's unsure whether Israel's broken international law?
Yes, I'm sure he is. He's not in a position himself to make that decision. What seems to me to be important is that at least there is some adjudication about this. Israel constantly wants to be judged in the same way as other states, and believes many international organisations do not do that. I think it's important for Israel, for the future of Israel, that it does get itself observed in just the same way as other states. And this means, in this case, to look at what has been happening in Gaza. It doesn't in any way take away the horror and the atrocity of October the 7th, and should not be measured in that way. To look at what has been happening now and see whether or not any rules have been breached, because if that is the case, then Israel is not in any way succeeding in recovering from October the 7th and doing what it has professed to want to do.
I don't know if you agree with that.
No, I do agree with Alistair. I mean, let's not forget in all of this that what happened on the 7th of October, instigated by Hamas, was a war crime. It went against any international standards of protecting civilian life. But, part of being part of the international community that we sign up to into a rules-based system, which clearly Hamas doesn't in that regard, is accountability. It's very difficult, I think, in the height of a conflict, whether it's this one or other ones, to be able to, for me, to adjudicate on what's happening. Of course, the number of civilians, particularly children, that have been killed or harmed, the bombings that we've seen, the scale of that, it's worrying. It's worrying, very worrying. And that will be held to account at some point. And Israel will have to explain about that. And the law will then have to play its role, the international law, in making some decisions about that. But we shall see. It is difficult now, in the heat of all this, to be able to actually say one way or the other. But of course, it should bring us concerns.
This conflict throws up so many challenges. The issue of a democratic state having to deal with the asymmetric warfare from a terrorist organisation that is not subject to any rules poses questions about what to do. But equally, there are answers to this. It cannot be right that targeting an individual Hamas commander costs so many civilian lives. How many? Without number. There comes a point at which it's just too much, and the gains being secured by removing a Hamas terrorist are outweighed by what is happening to the civilian population. That is what I think is concerning Israel's friends, its allies, the states it will need to have supporting it in the region to deal with the threat, because Hamas is not just a threat to Israel, it is a threat to other Arab countries because of its ideology. But Israel's actions at present are losing some of the support that it is going to need. And we're reaching a point where Israel's best friends have got to be very candid about what is happening, because what is happening at the moment is just not right.
The ideology point's quite important as well, isn't it? And the radicalisation threat that brings.
Each of these families that has lost someone, they are the terrorists of the future, and everyone recognises it.
And, if anything positive can at all come out of any of this, it's going back to what is the solution. And that has failed for decades to come to any thoughtful conclusion. And the UK and other countries, and particularly those in the Middle East, have a big role to play in this. And the people of Israel and the Palestinians themselves have a big role to play in this.
One of the challenges that we have if we're asking Israel to stop is to deal with the question, well, how is Israel to be secure? And there's got to be as much of an answer to Israel's security as there is to be an answer for justice for the Palestinians.
Thank you both very much. Lord Cameron there, we were just discussing at the Select Committee. Still to come on the Politics Hub this evening. Prepare to feel old. This is the 34-year-old, the new kid on the block, who is the new French Prime Minister. Yes, that is not a joke, 34 years old.
breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. शांति से इनको समझाओ वरना ये हम लोग
It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. What is feared that over 200 people might have died because of these landslides. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. This is one of the most sensitive areas of northeast Delhi where there's been clashes. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, if you're in your late 30s or older, prepare to feel like an underachiever. I'm going to apologise in advance for the story we're about to bring you, because the French President, Emmanuel Macron, has just appointed the country's 34-year-old Education Minister, Gabriel Attal, as Prime Minister. Now, he's the youngest French Prime Minister in modern history, and he will succeed Elizabeth Bourne, who resigned yesterday. Attal is also the first openly gay person to hold the post. There he is. Well, let's get the thoughts of Caroline and Alistair, shall we? I'm feeling quite old now, I'll be honest.
Well,
let's see how he delivers.
In politics, you're only as old as you feel. And
I like that. That's good. I totally agree.
You know, some of us are still waiting for the call, and you know, so long as you feel ready and up for it, I think that's the thing. You can, of course, do it too soon. And you know, William Hague, who became leader of the Conservative Party, probably a bit too early. And William would have made a wonderful Prime Minister and should have made a wonderful Prime Minister, but you know, he came too early. But if you're old, if you're good enough, you're old enough. Yeah. I suppose must be the sense, and they must think that. So the young man must be given an opportunity.
Yeah, maybe it's a bit different having a president. You know, being
this
involved
is a good point.
in
It's a fair point.
appointing your prime minister
and he's
and
not
this sort of
exactly
thing.
90 himself.
I mean, he does look like a bit of a mini-me, doesn't he, of Macron there as well. I don't want to send any rumour mills going on that front, but I mean, who knows? Who knows? The thing is that, you know, once you're given this, I mean, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, you have, you know, one term and that's it, and you're off. You've sort of peaked too soon. I think it was the Finnish Prime Minister, I think it was not so long ago, a young woman.
Yeah. What do you do afterwards?
So, what do you do afterwards?
Got like decades to fill.
Yeah. You can work as an intern somewhere or something like that, maybe.
No, you get called back to be Foreign Secretary in due course.
Yeah, I like it. Very good.
You're never off the game.
That's very good. Right, little quiz for you guys.
Oh, God.
Which two British Prime Ministers were younger than Gabriel Attal, the new French Prime Minister? Very good. He was just 24.
Yeah.
That really is young. And this one is really hard, so I think I'm going to give it to you. Augustus Fitzroy, the third Duke of Grafton, who was 33.
Of course.
Yeah, that guy. Yeah, sure.
He was still in the house in the smoking room when I got there in 1983. Yeah, he was in the corner.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. I feel like I'm getting to the stage now where I still find it weird where government ministers are older than me. Or younger than me, I should say. Like Darren.
Yeah.
Younger than me, Darren.
But with age does come a sort of bit of a collective memory, and I sort of find myself saying, I feel like I've been around this loop before on this issue. And that's valuable in itself.
I find myself as a minister sometimes addressing someone who was born after I'd come into the House of Commons.
Okay, that is good.
Oh, God.
Right, that is it from us tonight. I will see you tomorrow at 7. Up next, though, is SJ with the UK Tonight.